The steam rose from the industrial washing machines like morning fog over a battlefield. Sarah Martinez wiped the sweat from her forehead as she folded another stack of camouflage uniforms in the humid laundry facility at Fort Henderson. The clock on the concrete wall read 600 hours. She had been working since before dawn, just like every other day for the past 8 months. "Hey, laundry girl." The voice cut through the rumble of the machines. Sarah didn't need to look up to know it was Sergeant Rick Morrison, strutting through the doorway with his usual smirk. Behind him followed his pack of followers, all active-duty soldiers who seemed to find endless entertainment in mocking the woman who washed their clothes. "Got some extra dirty gear for you today," Morrison said, dropping a pile of muddy fatigues on the clean sorting table. "Try not to mess it up this time." Sarah's jaw tightened, but she said nothing. She had learned that responding only made things worse. Instead, she focused on the precise way she folded each uniform, creasing the sleeves with military precision that none of them seemed to notice. "I don't know why they even let civilians work on base," muttered Private Johnson, Morrison's eager sidekick, "especially ones who can't handle real work." The other soldiers laughed. To them, Sarah was just another face in the background, invisible, unimportant, and definitely not someone who belonged in their world of tactical operations and combat training. But they didn't know the truth. They didn't know that Sarah Martinez had once been Staff Sergeant Sarah Martinez, 75th Ranger Regiment. They didn't know she had completed 3 combat deployments in Afghanistan. They didn't know she held the base record for fastest rope descent, or that she could rappel down a 100-foot cliff face with nothing but 60 feet of rope and absolute precision. Most importantly, they didn't know why she was really here. 8 months ago, Sarah's world had collapsed in a single moment. She had been leading a reconnaissance mission in the mountains of Afghanistan when faulty intelligence led her team into an ambush. The explosion that followed took the lives of 3 soldiers under her command, 3 young men who trusted her, leadership, and paid the ultimate price for someone else's mistakes. The military investigation cleared her of any wrongdoing. The report stated clearly that the intelligence failure was not her fault. But Sarah couldn't clear herself. The faces of those 3 soldiers haunted her dreams. Their families' tears at the funeral services haunted her waking hours. So she made a choice that shocked everyone who knew her. Staff Sergeant Sarah Martinez, decorated veteran with a spotless record and a promising career ahead of her, submitted her discharge papers. She walked away from everything she had worked for, everything she had been. But walking away from the military completely felt like abandoning the memory of her fallen soldiers. She needed to stay connected somehow, to find a way to serve that didn't put anyone else at risk. When she heard about the civilian position in the base laundry facility, it seemed like the perfect solution. She could still be part of the military community without carrying the weight of command. She just hadn't expected the invisibility to hurt so much. "Earth to laundry girl." Morrison's voice snapped her back to the present. "I asked you a question." Sarah looked up, meeting his eyes for the first time. "What did you say?" "I said, do you even know what these uniforms are for? Or do you just wash whatever comes through that door?" The condescension in his voice made something burn in Sarah's chest. She knew exactly what those uniforms were for. She could identify the specific unit patches, the deployment indicators, even the subtle wear patterns that told her which soldiers saw actual combat and which ones spent their time behind a desk. "I wash them," she said simply. Morrison shook his head in disgust. Typical civilian. No understanding, no respect for what we do out there. If only he knew. If only any of them knew that the woman they dismissed as just the laundry girl had more combat experience than all of them combined. But Sarah had made her choice. She was done being a soldier. She was done making decisions that could cost lives. As Morrison and his group finally left, Sarah returned to her work. She picked up one of the uniforms from the pile they had dropped, a jacket belonging to Lieutenant Torres from the Special Operations Unit. The fabric was worn in specific places that told a story. Sarah had seen that pattern before on her own gear, back when she spent weeks at a time in the field. She ran her fingers along the sleeve, remembering the weight of her own tactical gear, the feel of rappelling rope between her hands, the rush of adrenaline during a perfect descent. Those days felt like a lifetime ago. The morning wore on with its usual routine. Sarah processed load after load of uniforms, sorting them by unit and rank with the same attention to detail she had once applied to mission planning. She knew the base's operational tempo by the type and condition of gear that came through her facility. Heavy training weeks meant more mud and wear. Deployment preparations meant everything needed to be perfect. Around noon, Master Sergeant Williams stopped by, one of the few people on base who treated Sarah with basic respect. "How's it going, Martinez?" he asked, using her last name the way soldiers did. "Fine, Sergeant," she replied, appreciating that he had never once called her laundry girl. "You know," Williams said, watching her work, "I keep thinking I recognize your name from somewhere. Martinez isn't exactly uncommon, but something about the way you carry yourself." He trailed off, studying her face. Sarah's hands stilled on the uniform she was folding. Williams was old-school military, the kind of soldier who paid attention to details and never forgot a face or a name. If anyone was going to piece together her past, it would be him. "I just have one of those faces," she said, forcing a smile. Williams nodded slowly, but Sarah could see the wheels turning in his mind. "Maybe so, but if you ever want to talk about anything, my door's always open." After he left, Sarah felt a familiar tightness in her chest. The anonymity she had sought was starting to crack. Soon people would start asking questions she wasn't ready to answer. The afternoon brought another visit from Morrison's crew, this time including some soldiers Sarah didn't recognize. They were discussing an upcoming training exercise, something about mountain operations and rappelling techniques. "The problem is finding qualified instructors," one of them was saying. "Half the guys who claim they can rappel can barely handle a basic descent." Morrison laughed. "What we need is someone with real experience, not like our laundry girl here. I bet she's never been higher off the ground than a stepladder." The comment hit harder than Sarah expected. She had spent years perfecting her climbing and rappelling skills. She had descended cliff faces in darkness, rappelled from helicopters under fire, and taught countless soldiers the techniques that saved their lives in the field. But now she was just the laundry girl. As the day ended, and Sarah prepared to leave, she noticed something that made her stop cold. On the bulletin board near the entrance, someone had posted a news article from a military publication. The headline read, "3 Rangers Killed in Afghanistan Ambush. Investigation Ongoing." Below it was a photo of her former team, including the 3 soldiers who had died under her command. Their faces stared back at her, frozen in time, wearing the confident smiles of young men who believed they were invincible. Sarah's hands trembled as she read her own name in the article. The report was months old, but seeing it displayed so publicly made her feel exposed and vulnerable. Anyone who read it would know exactly who she was and why she was no longer wearing the uniform she had once worn with such pride. She quickly took down the article and crumpled it in her hands. But the damage was done. The careful anonymity she had built was starting to unravel, and she wasn't sure she was ready for what would come next. As Sarah walked to her small apartment off base, she couldn't shake the feeling that everything was about to change. The quiet life she had built in the shadows of her former career suddenly felt fragile, like a house of cards waiting for the slightest breeze to bring it all crashing down. She had no idea that within 48 hours, everything she thought she knew about staying invisible would be put to the ultimate test. The skills she had tried to bury, the expertise she had walked away from, and the courage she thought she had lost forever would all be called upon in ways she could never have imagined. The laundry girl was about to become something much more dangerous. The emergency sirens shattered the pre-dawn silence at Fort Henderson like a knife through glass. Sarah jolted awake in her small apartment, her military instincts instantly alert despite 8 months of civilian life. The distinctive pattern of the alarm, 3 long blasts followed by 2 short ones, meant only one thing: base lockdown. Something was very, very wrong. Sarah threw on her clothes and rushed toward the base, her heart pounding with a familiar mixture of adrenaline and dread. The roads leading to Fort Henderson were already blocked by military police, their vehicles positioned with tactical precision that spoke of serious threat assessment. "Ma'am, I need to see your ID," called out Corporal Jenkins from behind the checkpoint barrier. Sarah fumbled for her civilian employee badge, the plastic card feeling foreign in her hands. Just months ago, she would have been on the other side of this checkpoint, probably helping coordinate the response to whatever crisis was unfolding. Civilian personnel are not permitted on base during code red situations, Jenkins said after scanning her badge. But I work here, Sarah protested. The laundry facility, not today, ma'am. Base is sealed until further notice. Sarah stood helplessly behind the concrete barriers as military vehicles raced past her toward the main buildings. Radio chatter filled the air, voices urgent and clipped with the efficiency of soldiers under pressure. She caught fragments of conversation: hostage situation, armed insurgents, civilians trapped. Then she heard the words that made her blood run cold. Building 7, 3rd floor. Building 7 housed the base's administrative offices, including the Family Support Center, where military spouses and children often gathered for events and meetings. If civilians were trapped there during an armed assault, Sarah closed her eyes, fighting back the image of scared families huddled together while armed men held them hostage. It was too much like the scenarios she had trained for, the situations she had once been called upon to resolve. But not anymore. She was just the laundry girl now. 20 minutes later, Master Sergeant Williams approached the checkpoint with quick, determined steps. His face was grim, and Sarah could see the weight of command responsibility etched in the lines around his eyes. "Williams," she called out before she could stop herself. He turned, surprised to see her. "Martinez? What are you doing here? I heard the sirens. What's happening?" Williams glanced around, then moved closer to the barrier. 3 armed men infiltrated the base during the night shift change. They've taken hostages in Building 7, 12 civilians, including 5 children. Sarah's stomach dropped. "Do we know what they want?" "They're demanding the release of a terrorist leader held at a federal facility. But that's not the worst part." Williams ran a hand through his gray hair. "The building's evacuation system failed during last week's maintenance. The main stairwells are blocked and the elevators are shut down as a security precaution. What about the emergency exits? That's the problem. The hostages are on the 3rd floor, and the only viable rescue route requires rappelling from the roof down to the windows. But half our qualified instructors are deployed overseas, and the other half are at a training exercise 200 miles away." Sarah felt her heart rate spike. This was exactly the kind of scenario she had trained for countless times. Vertical insertion, hostage extraction, working with limited space and time constraints. She knew that building's layout by heart, had even participated in training exercises there during her active duty. "What about the Special Operations Unit?" she asked. Williams shook his head. "They're good soldiers, but most of them are qualified for basic rappelling only. What we need is someone with advanced technical climbing skills. Someone who can handle a precision descent with hostages. Someone who can work the angles we need to avoid the hostage taker's line of sight." The words were out of Sarah's mouth before she could stop them. "I can do it." Williams stared at her for a long moment. "Martinez, I appreciate the offer, but this isn't a job for a civilian employee. I'm not just a civilian employee." Sarah's voice carried an authority that had been buried for 8 months. "Master Sergeant, I need you to run my name through the personnel database. Full military record." Something in her tone made Williams pay attention. He studied her face more carefully, and Sarah could see the moment recognition began to dawn. "Martinez. Staff Sergeant Sarah Martinez, 75th Rangers." "That's right." Williams' eyes widened. "Jesus Christ. I knew I recognized your name. You're the Martinez who holds the base record for fastest rope descent, yes, among other things. But what the hell are you doing working in the laundry facility?" Sarah's jaw tightened. "That's a long story. Right now, 12 people need help, and I'm qualified to give it." Williams was already pulling out his radio. "Colonel Hayes needs to hear this. Martinez, stay right here." But as Williams began walking toward the command post, Sarah heard another voice that made her blood boil. Did someone say they found a rappelling expert? Sergeant Morrison appeared from behind one of the tactical vehicles, his usual smirk replaced by the focused intensity of a soldier in crisis mode. "Because we need all hands on deck for this operation." "Actually," Williams began, "Martinez here has advanced." Morrison's expression changed the instant he saw Sarah. "Wait, you're talking about the laundry girl? Are you kidding me?" "Morrison, listen." "No, you listen." Morrison stepped closer, his voice carrying the dismissive tone Sarah had heard so many times before. "I don't know what kind of sob story she fed you, but this is life and death. We need real soldiers, not some civilian who thinks she can help because she watched a few action movies." Sarah felt 8 months of suppressed frustration boiling over. "Sergeant Morrison, with all due respect, you don't know what you're talking about." "Don't I? I know you're the woman who sorts dirty laundry for a living. I know you've never worn the uniform or carried the responsibility that comes with it. And I know that right now, while real soldiers are preparing to risk their lives, you're standing here pretending you can help." Other soldiers had gathered around, drawn by the raised voices. Sarah could see doubt in their faces, the same dismissive expression she had endured for months. To them, she would always be just the laundry girl, no matter what Williams might say about her record. "Morrison's right," said Captain Brooks, the Special Operations Team leader. "This is no time for civilians to play hero. We'll handle this with the personnel we have." "But sir," Williams protested, "if you would just check her records." "I've seen enough civilian contractors who think military experience makes them qualified for active operations," Brooks interrupted. "The answer is no." Sarah watched as the group of soldiers turned away, dismissing her without a second thought. The familiar feeling of invisibility settled over her like a heavy blanket, but this time it carried a different weight. This time people's lives hung in the balance. Williams caught her arm as the others walked away. "Martinez, I'm going to talk to the colonel directly." "Your record speaks for itself. It won't matter," Sarah said quietly. "They've already made up their minds about who I am." As if to prove her point, she heard Morrison's voice carrying back from the command vehicle. "Can you believe Williams wanted to send the laundry girl in for a hostage rescue? What's next, asking the janitor to defuse a bomb?" The laughter that followed felt like a physical blow. Sarah stood at the checkpoint for another hour, watching through binoculars as the tactical teams prepared their assault plan. She could see them studying the building schematics, testing their rappelling gear, running through scenarios on practice walls, and she could see the problems. The angle they were planning would put them directly in view of the hostage takers. The rope configuration they were using would work for a simple descent, but wouldn't allow for the lateral movement needed to reach the specific windows where the hostages were being held. Most critically, their timeline was too slow. In a hostage situation, every minute of delay increased the risk to innocent lives. She knew how to fix all of these problems. She could see the solution as clearly as if she were reading a manual. But no one would listen to the laundry girl. Then, at 13:47 hours, everything changed. The radio chatter suddenly intensified, voices tight with urgency. Sarah caught fragments. "Shots fired. Hostage down. We need to move now." Through her binoculars, she could see frantic activity around the command post. Someone was injured, either a hostage or a rescuer. The careful planning phase was over. It was time for action, whether they were ready or not. Williams appeared at the checkpoint, his face pale. "One of our advanced scouts took a bullet. The hostage takers know we're coming. We have maybe 10 minutes before they start executing civilians. What about the rappelling team? They're going in anyway." "They have to." "But Martinez." Williams looked her straight in the eyes. "I've seen their practice runs. They're good soldiers, but they're not good enough for this, not under these conditions." Sarah felt something shift inside her chest. The voice of command, dormant for 8 months, began to stir. "How many children did you say were in there?" 5. Ages 6 to 12. Sarah closed her eyes, seeing the faces of her fallen soldiers. But now she also saw the faces of children she had never met, children who were counting on anyone, to save them. "Williams," she said, her voice steady and clear, "I need you to get me bolt cutters." "What?" "Bolt cutters. And I need you to trust me for the next 30 minutes. Williams stared at her for a moment, then nodded slowly. "What are you planning?" Sarah looked toward Building 7, her mind already calculating angles, wind speed, rope tension, and the 100 other variables that would determine whether 12 innocent people lived or died. "I'm going to do what I should have done 8 months ago," she said. "I'm going to be a soldier." The bolt cutters felt heavy in Sarah's hands as she crouched behind the maintenance shed, studying Building 7 through the chain-link fence that separated the laundry facility from the main base. Williams had gotten her the tools, no questions asked, but she could see the doubt in his eyes. Everyone else was focused on the main assault happening at the front of the building. No one was watching the back, which was exactly what Sarah was counting on. She had spent 8 months walking past this building every day, noticing details that only a trained soldier would see. She knew about the service ladder that led to the roof, hidden behind overgrown bushes that maintenance had been meaning to trim. She knew about the weak point in the fence where vehicles had damaged the posts. Most importantly, she knew about the laundry lines. Every morning at 6:30, the base laundry facility hung out industrial-grade clotheslines between Building 7 and the equipment shed. The lines were made of high-tensile steel cable, rated for much more weight than the uniforms and linens they typically held. Sarah had installed them herself during her first week, using the same knots and rigging techniques she had learned in ranger training. Those clotheslines were about to become a lifeline. Sarah cut through the fence with surgical precision, creating an opening just large enough for her to slip through. The sound of gunfire from the front of the building masked any noise she made. Her heart was pounding, but her hands were steady. For the first time in 8 months, she felt like herself again. The service ladder was exactly where she remembered it. Rusted, but solid, Sarah began to climb, her body automatically falling into the rhythm she had practiced thousands of times. Hand over hand, breathing controlled, eyes focused upward. With each rung, she felt the weight of her civilian identity falling away. The radio chatter from the main assault team crackled through the air, voices tight with stress and urgency. Alpha Team. Report. Still no clear shot on the hostage takers. They've positioned themselves perfectly. Bravo Team. Negative. The angle's all wrong. We can't get down to the target windows without exposing ourselves. Sarah reached the roof and immediately moved to the edge overlooking the rear of the building. 3 stories down, she could see the windows where the hostages were being held. From this angle, she had a clear view that the front assault teams couldn't achieve. More importantly, the hostage takers couldn't see her. She quickly assessed the clothesline rigging points. The steel cables ran from anchor points on Building 7's roof to similar anchors on the equipment shed. The distance was approximately 60 feet with a slight downward angle, perfect for a controlled descent. But Sarah needed more than just a way down. She needed mobility, precision, and the ability to carry hostages if necessary. The standard military rappelling gear the assault teams were using wouldn't work for this scenario. That's when she remembered the industrial pulley system in the laundry facility. Moving quickly, but quietly, Sarah rappelled down her own clothesline to the laundry facility's second-floor service entrance. Her feet touched the familiar concrete floor, and she immediately went to work. The industrial washing machines were connected by a complex pulley and cable system designed to move heavy loads of wet laundry between floors. Sarah began disconnecting components with the efficiency of someone who had worked with this equipment every day for 8 months. But now she was seeing it through the eyes of a soldier, not a civilian employee. 20 minutes later, she had created something that would have impressed her old instructors at Fort Benning. Using the clotheslines as her primary anchor points and the laundry facility's pulley system as her mechanical advantage, Sarah had rigged a lateral zipline system that would allow her to move horizontally along the building's rear face while maintaining perfect control of her descent rate. The beauty of the system was its simplicity. The clotheslines that Morrison and his crew had mocked as symbols of Sarah's irrelevance were about to become the very tools that saved 12 innocent lives. Sarah tested the rigging with her full body weight. The steel cables held firm, the pulleys moved smoothly, and the improvised harness she had, fashioned from laundry facility equipment, distributed the load perfectly across her body. She was ready. The radio chatter had become increasingly desperate while she worked. Command, we're running out of time. The hostage takers are getting agitated. Can we get a sniper angle? Negative. They're using the children as human shields. Charlie Team, what's your status on the south approach? No good. They'll see us coming a mile away. Sarah clipped into her improvised zipline system and pushed off from the laundry facility roof. The sensation of controlled flight felt like coming home. Wind rushed past her face as she glided silently toward Building 7, the clotheslines singing softly under the tension of her weight. She landed on the building's rear fire escape with barely a sound. Through the windows, she could see the hostage situation clearly for the first time. 3 armed men, all wearing tactical gear, had positioned themselves in a triangular formation around 12 civilians. 5 children sat huddled together in the center, their faces pale with terror. 7 adults, including 3 military spouses Sarah recognized from the base community, were arranged as human shields around the room's perimeter. The lead hostage taker was speaking into a radio, his voice angry and aggressive. Sarah couldn't hear the words, but his body language suggested that negotiations were not going well. She had to move fast. Sarah rappelled down the building's exterior wall, using the fire escape structure to control her descent. Her improvised gear worked flawlessly, allowing her to move with the silence and precision that had once made her one of the Army's top infiltration specialists. At the third-floor level, she positioned herself directly outside the window, where most of the children were being held. The hostage-taker nearest to them had his back turned, focused on the front of the building where he expected the assault to come from. Sarah pulled out a small mirror from her tactical kit, one of the few pieces of military equipment she had kept. Using it to check the angles inside the room, she began planning her entry. The window was old style, the kind that opened outward on hinges. If she could time it perfectly with a distraction from the front assault team, she might be able to get inside and eliminate the immediate threat to the children before the other hostage-takers could react, but timing was everything. Sarah keyed into the tactical frequency she had memorized from listening to the radio chatter. Military communications protocols were burned into her memory, just like everything else from her previous life. "Alpha Team, this is Martinez," she whispered into her radio. The response was immediate and incredulous. "Who the hell is Martinez? This is a secure frequency. Listen to me carefully. I have a clean angle on the hostages from the building's rear. I need you to create a distraction at the front entrance in exactly 60 seconds. Martinez, identify yourself immediately or get off this frequency." There's no time to explain. "I'm Staff Sergeant Sarah Martinez, 75th Rangers. I'm in position to extract the children, but I need that distraction." A different voice came on the radio, Colonel Hayes himself. "Martinez, if this is really you, you need to abort immediately. You're not authorized for this operation. Sir, with respect, those children don't care about authorization. They need help now." "Martinez, 60 seconds, Colonel. Front entrance." "Trust me." Sarah turned off her radio and focused on the window. Inside, she could see one of the children, a little girl with pigtails who couldn't have been more than 7 years old. The child was crying silently, tears streaming down her face as she tried to be brave. Sarah thought about her fallen soldiers, about the weight of command, about the responsibility of protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. For 8 months she had run from that responsibility. She had convinced herself that she was too damaged, too dangerous, too broken to be trusted with other people's lives. But looking at that little girl's face, Sarah realized she had been wrong. The courage to act when others needed help wasn't something you lost. It was something you chose to use or chose to ignore. Sarah chose to use it. At exactly 60 seconds, the sound of flashbang grenades exploded from the front of the building. The hostage-takers spun toward the noise exactly as Sarah had hoped. In one fluid motion, she swung the window open and dropped into the room. The nearest hostage-taker never saw her coming. Sarah's hand struck his throat with surgical precision and he collapsed silently. She caught his weapon before it could hit the floor and immediately turned toward the 2 remaining threats. "Get down," she shouted to the hostages as gunfire erupted around her. The next 30 seconds were a blur of training and instinct. Sarah moved through the room like a force of nature, using every technique she had ever learned to neutralize the threats while protecting the civilians. Her improvised equipment held perfectly, allowing her to use the room's geometry to her advantage. When the smoke cleared, all 3 hostage-takers were down, and every single civilian was alive and unhurt. The little girl with pigtails looked up at Sarah with wide, grateful eyes. "Are you a soldier?" she whispered. Sarah knelt down beside her, checking for injuries with gentle hands. "Yes, sweetheart. I'm a soldier. For the first time in 8 months." Saying those words felt true. The main assault team burst through the front entrance just as Sarah was helping the last of the hostages toward the window where her zipline system waited to evacuate them to safety. Sergeant Morrison was the first through the door. His face went white when he saw Sarah standing in the middle of the room, surrounded by the people she had just saved. "What the hell? How did you?" Morrison stammered. Sarah looked him straight in the eyes. "The laundry girl knows a few things about knots, Sergeant." Outside, she could hear the sound of applause as the evacuated hostages reached safety. Colonel Hayes was shouting orders for medical teams, and the base's emergency sirens were finally beginning to wind down. But Sarah wasn't thinking about any of that. She was thinking about the 3 soldiers she had lost 8 months ago, and about the 12 civilians she had just saved. Maybe redemption wasn't about forgetting the past. Maybe it was about using the past to build a better future. As she prepared to help evacuate the last of the hostages, Sarah realized that her time as the invisible laundry girl was about to end. The question was, what would come next? The silence in the command center was deafening. 12 rescued hostages sat wrapped in emergency blankets, safe and alive, while 3 neutralized terrorists lay zip-tied on the floor of Building 7. And standing in the middle of it all was the woman they had called just the laundry girl. Colonel Hayes was the first to break the silence. "Martinez, I need a full debrief now." Sarah stood at attention, her improvised tactical gear still clipped to the clotheslines that had carried her to victory. "Sir, I utilized existing infrastructure to create an alternate entry point. The laundry facility's cable system provided the mechanical advantage needed for a silent approach." "The laundry facility?" Morrison stepped forward, his face a mixture of confusion and disbelief. "You used actual clotheslines?" "High-tensile steel cable rated for industrial use," Sarah replied calmly, "combined with pulley systems from the washing machine maintenance equipment. Standard materials, unconventional application." Captain Brooks, the special operations team leader who had dismissed her hours earlier, was staring at the zip-line rigging with professional admiration. This is actually brilliant. The angle, the mechanical advantage, the silent approach vector. "Where did you learn to improvise equipment like this?" Sarah's jaw tightened slightly. "Same place I learned to neutralize 3 armed hostiles in a confined space with civilians present, sir." The weight of her words settled over the room like a heavy blanket. Master Sergeant Williams stepped forward, holding a tablet with Sarah's military records displayed on the screen. "Colonel," Williams said quietly, "I think you need to see this." Colonel Hayes took the tablet, his eyes scanning the information. As he read, his expression changed from confusion to surprise to something approaching awe. "Staff Sergeant Sarah Martinez, 75th Ranger Regiment," he read aloud. 3 combat deployments. Distinguished Service Cross, Bronze Star with V device for valor, expert marksman, advanced tactical climbing instructor. He looked up at Sarah. "You hold the base record for fastest rope descent." Morrison's face had gone pale. "That's impossible. She's the laundry girl. She sorts dirty uniforms." "No, Sergeant," Colonel Hayes said, his voice carrying the authority of command. "She's a decorated war hero who's been washing your dirty uniforms for 8 months while you treated her like she was invisible." The silence that followed was broken by the sound of approaching vehicles. Through the windows, they could see news crews setting up equipment, drawn by reports of the hostage situation and its dramatic resolution. "Sir," Sarah said quietly, "I request permission to return to my duties." "Your duties?" Colonel Hayes looked at her incredulously. "Martinez, you just single-handedly saved 12 lives using equipment you rigged from laundry supplies. I think we need to discuss your duties." Sarah's composure finally began to crack. "With respect, sir, I'm not active duty anymore. I'm a civilian employee and I'd like to keep it that way." "Why?" The question came from Morrison, whose entire worldview had just been shattered. "Why would someone with your record, your abilities, choose to work in a laundry facility?" Sarah was quiet for a long moment, staring at her hands. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Because the last time I led soldiers into combat, 3 of them didn't come home." The room fell silent again. Through the windows, they could see the families of the rescued hostages gathering outside, crying with relief as they embraced their loved ones. Williams stepped closer. "Martinez, what happened in Afghanistan?" "I read the report. The intelligence failure wasn't your fault." "Tell that to Specialist Chen's mother," Sarah said, her voice thick with emotion. "Tell that to Corporal Williams. No relation to you, Sergeant, who was 19 years old and planning to propose to his girlfriend when he got home. Tell that to Private Rodriguez, who wanted to be a teacher after his service ended." The pain in her voice was raw, unguarded. For 8 months she had carried this weight alone, hidden behind the anonymity of her civilian job. "They trusted me," she continued. "They followed my orders and they died because someone else made a mistake with the intelligence. But it was my mission, my responsibility, my failure." Morrison, who had spent months mocking her, now looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. "Martinez, I had no idea." "Of course you didn't," Sarah said, looking at him directly, "because you saw what you expected to see. A civilian employee who didn't belong in your world. Someone beneath your notice, but why didn't you tell us?" Why didn't you say something? Sarah's laugh was bitter. When? When you were calling me laundry girl and dropping muddy gear on my clean work? When you were joking about how I'd probably never been higher than a step ladder? Would that have been a good time to mention that I used to train soldiers like you in advanced climbing techniques? The shame on Morrison's face was visible to everyone in the room. But Sarah wasn't done. For 8 months, I listened to you and your friends talk about what real soldiers look like, what they do, how they think. And every day I wondered if maybe you were right. Maybe I wasn't really a soldier anymore. Maybe I never deserved to wear the uniform in the first place. Colonel Hayes stepped forward. Martinez, that's enough. You saved 12 lives today. You proved exactly what kind of soldier you are. Did I? Sarah's voice was challenging now. Or did I prove that I can't let go of a life that I gave up? Those hostages needed help and I acted on instinct. But what happens tomorrow? What happens the next time someone needs me to make a command decision that could get people killed? The little girl with pigtails appeared in the doorway, having slipped away from the medical team checking the rescued hostages. She ran straight to Sarah and wrapped her arms around her legs. Thank you for saving us, the child said simply. You're the bravest person I ever met. Sarah knelt down to the girl's level, her tough exterior cracking completely. What's your name, sweetheart? Emma? My daddy's deployed, so it was just me and Mommy when the bad men came. I was really scared, but then you came down from the sky like a superhero. Sarah felt tears burning her eyes. I'm not a superhero, Emma. I'm just someone who couldn't stand by and watch when you needed help. That's what superheroes do, Emma said with the absolute certainty of childhood. They help people who need help. Over Emma's head, Sarah saw the girl's mother approaching with tears of gratitude streaming down her face. Behind her were the other rescued hostages, all looking at Sarah with expressions of profound thanks. Ms. Martinez, Emma's mother said, I don't know how to thank you. When I saw those men with guns, I thought we were going to die. But you risked your life to save people you didn't even know. Sarah stood slowly, still holding Emma's hand. Around the room, she could see the faces of the soldiers who had dismissed her for so long. But their expressions had changed. The mockery was gone, replaced by respect, admiration, and in Morrison's case, deep shame. Colonel Hayes cleared his throat. Martinez, I'm not going to pretend to understand everything you've been through. But what I saw today, what you accomplished, that's not something you walk away from. Sir? I'm reinstating your active duty status effective immediately. Full rank restoration, and I'm putting you in charge of our new tactical rescue training program. Sarah shook her head. Colonel, I appreciate the offer, but it's not an offer, Martinez. It's an order. You just proved that experience, knowledge, and courage don't disappear because you're processing laundry instead of leading missions. The Army needs soldiers like you. Morrison stepped forward, his voice humble for the first time since Sarah had known him. Martinez, Sarah, I owe you an apology. Hell, I owe you more than that. I was wrong about everything. Sarah looked at him for a long moment. You were wrong about who I was, Sergeant. But maybe I was wrong about who I am. She looked around the room at the faces of the people she had saved, the soldiers who now saw her clearly for the first time, and the little girl who still held her hand with absolute trust. Specialist Chen, Corporal Williams and Private Rodriguez died because of bad intelligence, she said quietly. But 12 people are alive today because I remembered who I used to be. Maybe that's what they would have wanted. Colonel Hayes nodded. Report for duty tomorrow at 600, Staff Sergeant Martinez. And Martinez? Yes, sir? Bring those clotheslines. I have a feeling we're going to be teaching some very unconventional tactics. As the sun set over Fort Henderson, Sarah walked past the laundry facility one last time. The clotheslines still hung between the buildings, steel cables gleaming in the golden light. Tomorrow, those same lines would be part of a training program that would teach future soldiers to see opportunity where others saw only obstacles. Morrison appeared beside her, carrying a duffel bag full of clean uniforms. I'll take these to the facility, he said quietly. Since you won't be working there anymore, Sarah smiled, the first genuine smile she had shown in months. Just remember, Sergeant, sometimes the most important skills come from the most unexpected places. Yes, ma'am. I won't forget. As Sarah walked toward her apartment to pack her military gear for tomorrow's return to duty, she felt something she hadn't experienced in 8 months. Peace. The faces of her fallen soldiers would always be with her, but now they were joined by the faces of the people she had saved. She wasn't running from her past anymore. She was building on it. Behind her, the clotheslines swayed gently in the evening breeze, no longer just a symbol of menial work, but a reminder that heroes come in all forms. Sometimes they wear uniforms and medals, sometimes they sort laundry and fix washing machines, and sometimes, when it matters most, they use clotheslines to rappel into legend. The laundry girl was gone. Staff Sergeant Sarah Martinez had come home.